I'm going to say this in the plainest way I know how, because the more carefully you phrase something like this, the easier it is for people to dismiss it. Something has been watching my family for years. I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I'm not talking about a feeling, or a sense, or a mood that settled into the house and never left. I mean watching in the most literal sense a person can mean it. Eyes. Attention. Presence. Observation. I understand how that sounds. If someone had told me the same thing 10 years ago, I would have nodded politely, waited for them to finish, and then decided they were either exaggerating or confused. Probably both. Because that's what reasonable people do when they hear claims that don't fit inside the shape of ordinary life. They sort them into categories that make them manageable. Stress. Imagination. Coincidence. Misinterpretation. I used to be very good at doing that. I grew up in a place where nothing unusual ever happened. A quiet street. Even spacing between houses. Lawns trimmed on weekends. Porch lights switching off one by one at night like a row of closing eyes. No crime scene tape. No police lights washing the walls red and blue. No stories people whispered about after dark. If you had asked anyone who lived there to describe it, they would have used the same word. Normal. My parents were normal too. The kind who worried about interest rates, grocery lists, and whether the car needed servicing before a long drive. My dad worked late. My mom reminded everyone about appointments. We ate dinner at the table more often than not. We locked the doors before bed. We said goodnight. We slept. Nothing about my childhood suggested I would ever have a reason to say a sentence like the one I started with. I'm 22 now. I still live in that same house. Same street. Same room I grew up in. Same window facing the road. Same view of the same stretch of pavement under the same streetlight that hums just loud enough to hear when everything else is quiet. And now I can't look out of it at night without wondering who's looking back. That change didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single moment where everything shifted and announced itself. It was slower than that. Quieter. The kind of change you only recognize after it's already taken hold, when you realize your habits have adjusted without your permission. When you notice you've started pausing before turning off lights. Listening before opening doors. Checking reflections in glass. But I didn't always think that way. For most of my life, the world felt straightforward. Cause led to effect. Sounds had sources. Shadows had explanations. If something didn't make sense, it was only because I didn't yet have enough information. That belief is hard to lose when it's been reinforced for years. It becomes a default setting. A lens. You assume there's a reasonable answer, and you wait for it to show up. That's how it started for us. With reasonable answers. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I'm not telling this because I want attention. I'm telling it because once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it, and I've reached a point where pretending I don't see it takes more effort than admitting I do. I've gone back over these memories carefully. Compared dates. Checked details. Tested my own recall against what other people remember. I've tried to disprove myself more times than I can count. If I could explain it away, I would. It would be easier if I could say all of this was just a misunderstanding that grew larger in hindsight. Memory does that sometimes. It edits. It rearranges. It fills gaps. I know that. I've read enough to know how unreliable recollection can be, especially when fear gets involved. Fear is good at rewriting things. It adds emphasis where none existed. It stretches seconds into minutes. It turns ordinary noises into warnings. That's why I took so long to accept what I'm about to tell you. Because for years, every strange detail had a harmless explanation attached to it. Every unusual moment came with a logical alternative. And when you have an alternative, you take it. People always do. It's easier to believe you misheard something than to believe something was actually there. So for a long time, that's what I believed. That we were mishearing things. Misseeing things. Misunderstanding things. That nothing was wrong. That nothing had ever been wrong. And if you had stood outside our house back then, you would have believed that too. You would have seen a quiet street. Closed curtains. Maybe a television flickering softly through a living room window. You would have heard the faint buzz of that streetlight overhead and the distant sound of a car passing every so often. You might have noticed the wind moving through the trees. You might have seen a curtain shift slightly in an upstairs window. You would not have seen anything that looked like a warning. You would not have seen anything that looked like a sign. You would have kept walking and forgotten the house entirely within a minute or two, because there was nothing about it that demanded attention. And that's exactly why it took us so long. Because whatever was happening never announced itself. It never rushed. It never forced us to react. It stayed just subtle enough to be dismissed, just distant enough to be doubted, just quiet enough to blend into the background of ordinary life. But behind the scenes, something darker was waiting. Something far worse than coincidence, or so it seemed. I didn't understand that yet, though. Back then, I was still the kind of person who believed that if something truly strange were happening, it would look strange immediately. That it would arrive loudly. Obviously. That it would introduce itself in a way no one could mistake. I know better now. Because real fear doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives with stillness. Sometimes it arrives with patience. Sometimes it arrives so slowly that by the time you realize it's there, it's already been there for years. The first time anything happened, I didn't even know it was something worth remembering. I was young enough that memories didn't organize themselves yet. They just floated. Moments without timestamps. Sounds without context. The only reason this one stayed is because of how my dad's voice sounded when I heard it. It was a weekend morning. Quiet house. The kind of quiet that only exists before noon, when sunlight is already filling the rooms but nobody's fully awake yet. I came downstairs expecting cartoons, cereal, the usual routine. Instead I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. Not arguing. Just low. Careful. The kind of voices adults use when they think children aren't paying attention. I wasn't trying to listen. I was just standing in the hallway tying the drawstring on my shorts when I heard my dad say, "It happened again." That word stuck. Again. It wasn't loud. It wasn't urgent. He didn't sound scared. If anything, he sounded tired. Like someone mentioning a dripping faucet that hadn't been fixed yet. I stepped into the doorway and asked what happened. Both of them looked at me at the same time. That's the part one remember most clearly. Not what they said. How fast they said it. Nothing. Just talking. You misheard. Conversation over. My mom asked if I wanted pancakes. My dad picked up his coffee. The tone in the room shifted so quickly it almost felt rehearsed, like they'd practiced ending discussions before I entered. And because I was a kid, I accepted it. At least for a few days. Then my older brother told me. Not because he meant to. Because he forgot he wasn't supposed to. We were outside tossing a ball back and forth, and I mentioned hearing Dad say something weird that morning. I asked if he knew what it was about. He hesitated. Not long. Just long enough for me to notice. Then he told me. A few nights earlier, Dad had been upstairs in his office working late. That wasn't unusual. He's a lawyer. Deadlines don't really care what time it is, and he's always been the kind of person who finishes things before he sleeps. So the house had gone quiet hours earlier. Lights off. Doors locked. Everyone else in bed. Except him. His desk sits right beside the window. From that chair you can see the entire stretch of road in front of our house. Not just our driveway, the street itself. Both directions. At some point after midnight, he noticed headlights moving past the window. That wasn't unusual either. Cars pass at night. Even on quiet streets. What caught his attention was the speed. Slow. Not cautious. Not careful. Slow, like the driver had taken their foot off the pedals completely and was letting the vehicle roll forward on its own weight. 5 miles an hour. Maybe less. He watched it for a few seconds, then went back to his paperwork. A few minutes later, the headlights passed again. Same speed. Opposite direction. That's when he started paying attention. He leaned back in his chair and watched the window. The vehicle came into view again. Dark SUV. Large body. Could have been any number of models. No music. No turn signal. No sign the driver was looking for an address. It reached the stretch of curb directly across from our house. And stopped. Pause twos. No door opened. No interior light came on. Nothing. It just sat there. My dad kept watching, expecting someone to step out. Maybe a neighbor's guest. Maybe someone checking directions. Maybe someone on the phone. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. He told my brother he remembered thinking it was odd, but not alarming. Strange behavior doesn't automatically mean threatening behavior. People do unusual things for ordinary reasons all the time. So he went back to work. Every few minutes he glanced up. Still there. Same position. Same angle. Same headlights off. Same silhouette behind the wheel that didn't move. The longer it stayed, the less he liked it. Not because it was doing anything. Because it wasn't. Stillness can do something noise can't. Noise demands attention, then fades. Stillness just waits. It sits there and lets your mind fill in possibilities. Around 2 in the morning, he fell asleep at his desk. Papers spread out. Lamp on. Pen in his hand. When he woke up, it was around 5:30. First thing he did was check the window. The SUV was still there. Same spot. Same angle. Like it hadn't moved even an inch. He stood up then. Actually stood. Leaned closer to the glass. And right as he did, the engine started. Headlights came on. The vehicle pulled away from the curb. And drove off slowly down the street until it disappeared. No rush. No hesitation. Just gone. He told my brother that was the moment his stomach dropped. Not when it arrived. Not when it stopped. When it left. Because it left at the exact moment he got up to look closer. Like it had been waiting for that. When my brother finished telling me the story, he shrugged. Said Dad thought it was probably nothing. Someone resting. Someone lost. Someone checking an address. Maybe even someone who couldn't sleep and decided to drive around. All reasonable explanations. All ordinary possibilities. And I believed them. Because nothing bad happened after that. No one knocked on the door. No one tried the handle. No one came onto the property. Life kept moving exactly the way it always had. School. Dinner. Homework. Weekends. The kind of routine that makes strange moments feel smaller every day that nothing follows them. So the story faded. It became one of those things you remember once in a while and then forget again. A minor oddity. A harmless mystery. Something that didn't need solving because it didn't cause a problem. At the time, it felt strange. But strange isn't the same as dangerous. After that night, nothing happened. And I don't mean nothing obvious. I mean nothing at all. No strange cars. No footsteps. No shadows where they shouldn't be. No sounds outside the house that didn't belong there. Just days. Then weeks. Then months. Quiet ones. The ordinary kind people forget as soon as they're over. Life resumed its usual rhythm the way water settles after a stone sinks out of sight. Morning alarms. School buses. Dishes in the sink. Television murmuring from another room. The street outside behaved exactly the way a safe street is supposed to behave. Predictable traffic. Predictable faces. Predictable silence at night. If you had stood on our sidewalk that year, you would have seen nothing worth remembering. Mailboxes opening. Lawns being cut. Kids riding bikes in slow circles that traced the same patterns every afternoon. And if you'd asked anyone living there whether anything unusual had ever happened, they would have said no. That's how memory works when nothing reinforces it. The mind files strange things away if they don't repeat. It smooths them out. Softens the edges. Turns them from warnings into anecdotes. The story of the car across the street stopped being an event. It became a story my brother told sometimes when we were bored. Usually it ended with a shrug. Probably nothing. That phrase does more than comfort you. It edits your past. Years move the way years do when you're young, faster than you notice while they're happening. Grades changed. Teachers changed. Clothes stopped fitting. Interests shifted. Childhood didn't end all at once. It thinned out slowly, like fog lifting off pavement. And with it, the memory thinned too. Not erased. Just filed away somewhere distant, where it didn't interrupt daily life. If I thought about it at all, it was with curiosity instead of concern. A strange thing that happened once. The kind of thing people laugh about later because it never led anywhere. We never saw the vehicle again. No one mentioned it at dinner. My dad never brought it up on his own. And because he didn't treat it like a problem, neither did we. Authority shapes perception in quiet ways. When the person you trust most behaves like something isn't serious, your brain follows that lead. It lowers its guard. It relaxes. That's how calm becomes default again. Seasons passed over the house like pages turning. Summer light through open windows. Autumn leaves collecting along the curb. Winter frost crawling across the glass in thin white veins. Spring rain tapping gently on the roof. Each season arrived on time. Each season left on time. Nothing interrupted them. Nothing inserted itself into the pattern. Routine is powerful like that. Routine convinces you that yesterday predicts tomorrow. It tells you that because something hasn't happened again, it probably won't. And the longer that pattern holds, the stronger that belief becomes. Psychologists have a term for it. Habituation. The process where repeated calm reduces sensitivity to past alarms. Even remembered fear loses weight when reality doesn't support it. Your brain prefers stability. It wants consistency. So when an unusual moment isn't followed by consequences, the mind quietly reclassifies it. From warning to coincidence. From coincidence to curiosity. From curiosity to nothing. That's what happened to us. The night of the car stopped feeling like a question. It started feeling like a detail. Something small. Something harmless. Something that belonged to the past and stayed there. And once it stayed there long enough, we stopped looking for anything like it. We stopped watching the street. Stopped wondering who might be passing by. Stopped thinking about who might be looking in. Because nothing else happened. Not the next month. Not the next year. Not for a long time. The longer nothing happens, the easier it is to believe nothing ever will. The next time something happened, it didn't announce itself. There was no noise at first. No warning. No feeling that anything was about to change. I was 15, sitting at my desk with my headphones on, working on music the way I did most nights back then. The desk faced the window. Not because I liked the view, there wasn't much to see, but because that's where it fit best in the room. Street to my left. Screen in front of me. Keyboard under my hands. Everything familiar. Everything ordinary. The house was quiet. My parents asleep. My brother in his room. The kind of silence that settles over a place when the whole structure has agreed it's done for the day. In my headphones, the track looped. Same 8 bars. Same rhythm. Same soft static between beats. I was focused on a sound adjustment, one tiny change that only I would probably ever notice. And that's why I saw it. Not because I was looking. Because it moved. Just a flicker. A brief wash of light crossing the edge of my desk. I glanced toward the window automatically, expecting headlights passing by like they always did. Except these weren't passing. They were creeping. One car. Then another behind it. Then a third. All moving slowly down the street in a line, engines barely pushing them forward. Not stalled. Not hesitant. Intentional. Their speed was wrong. Not slow like someone searching for an address. Slow like someone taking their time. I slid one side of my headphones off so I could hear better. That's when I noticed the beams. Flashlights. Inside the cars. At first my brain didn't process it. It tried to fit what I was seeing into a normal explanation. Maybe they dropped something. Maybe someone was reading house numbers. Maybe it was nothing. Then the first beam swept across my neighbor's yard. It moved steadily. Grass. Porch. Garage door. Window. It didn't linger. It examined. The second beam followed seconds later, repeating the same path like someone double-checking what the first person saw. The third beam came last. Slower than the others. More deliberate. My chest tightened before I even understood why. The lights weren't scanning the road. They were scanning the houses. I stayed still in my chair, watching through the glass as the first car rolled past our driveway. The beam from inside it drifted across our mailbox, climbed the front of our house, then slid away again as the car continued forward. The second beam followed. Fence. Tree. Brick wall. Gone. For a second, I thought that was it. Then the third beam turned toward my window. There's a very specific feeling when you realize something is about to land on you. Not touch. Not strike. Just land. My body reacted before my thoughts did. I ducked. Fast. Silent. Instinctive. 2 seconds later, my ceiling filled with light. White. Bright. Searching. The beam moved slowly across the plaster, drifting from one corner to the other like it was reading the room from above. I could see the edges of furniture shadows shifting on the walls. The light didn't shake. Whoever held it had a steady hand. I stayed crouched under the window, barely breathing, counting seconds without meaning to. 1. 2. 3. 4. The light vanished. Darkness folded back into place. I didn't move right away. My ears strained for any sound that might tell me what they were doing now. Through the muffled pressure of my headphones hanging around my neck, I heard tires. Slow. Crunching lightly against the pavement. The cars were moving again. I stood up slowly and looked. They were already near the end of the street, taillights shrinking, turning the corner in a line the same way they'd arrived. No sudden acceleration. No panic. No hesitation. Just, gone. I stayed there at the window for a long time after they disappeared, staring at the empty stretch of road like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. Nothing did. No doors opened outside. No voices. No footsteps. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had 10 minutes earlier. Calm. Still. Harmless. My brain started working through explanations immediately. That's what it does when something doesn't fit. It searches for reasons the way your tongue searches for a missing tooth. Maybe they were checking addresses. Maybe they were looking for someone's house. Maybe they were security. Maybe they were just bored. Each idea felt reasonable for about 5 seconds. Then it didn't. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I thought they were coming back. But because I couldn't decide whether what I'd seen mattered. That uncertainty is heavier than fear. Fear gives you direction. Uncertainty just sits there. Morning came like it always does, light through the curtains, birds outside, the sound of someone in the kitchen moving dishes. Everything normal. Everything safe again. At breakfast I told my parents what I'd seen. I expected concern. Instead, I got logic. They were probably checking which houses were empty. My dad said it calmly, like he'd already solved it. People scouting. People casing neighborhoods. People looking for easy targets. It made sense. Too much sense. Because once he said it, the whole thing snapped into place as something explainable again. Suspicious, maybe. Unusual, sure. But grounded. Real world. Ordinary in the way crimes sometimes are. My mom nodded. Conversation moved on. And just like that, the moment lost its weight. That's the strange thing about reassurance. It doesn't have to prove anything. It just has to sound possible. Once there's a reasonable explanation, your mind grabs it and holds on tight, because the alternative is admitting you don't understand what you saw. So I accepted it. Mostly. Life went back to normal again. School. Homework. Music. Weekends. The cars didn't return. No lights came back to the window. Nights passed quietly, one after another, stacking into months. But something small had changed inside me. Not panic. Not paranoia. Just awareness. Because once you've seen something look into your room, you start wondering how often it happens when you don't notice. That was the first time I felt seen. The calm of summer morning broke over our street like any other. Lawns glistened with dew, birds called to each other, and the neighborhood felt exactly as it always had. Then the landscaper called my dad. He'd been trimming along the edge of our backyard fence, where the hedges were thickest, when his pruning shears snagged on something small and hard. At first he assumed it was trash, a discarded piece of plastic, maybe a toy. But when he picked it up, he realized it wasn't ordinary at all. It was a tiny camera. No bigger than a car key. Lens facing outward, casing camouflaged in dull black. Battery dead. No SIM. No memory card. Nothing inside that could tell us what had been recorded. Nothing tangible, except its very existence. The realization hit in layers. First, someone had been close. Close enough to navigate the hedges and plant a device directly in our yard. Second, it wasn't random. Someone had chosen this location carefully. Third, it could have been recording. Streaming. Observing. And we never saw a thing. I held the camera in my hand, turning it over slowly, gloved fingers brushing the lens. It was just plastic. Tiny. Harmless looking. But the implication weighed heavier than any object should. My dad called the police. Report filed. Officer came. Took the device. Wrote notes on a clipboard. Asked the usual questions. Who might want to do this? Have there been break-ins? Suspicious people? There were no answers. No suspects. No prints. No leads. The officer left. Silence returned to our street. Lawn mowers hummed again. Birds sang. The world kept moving as if nothing had happened. But inside, nothing felt the same. The object itself, the camera, didn't do anything actively threatening. It didn't knock on the door. It didn't make a sound. But it proved what my eyes had suspected all along. That strange pattern, the odd timing, the cars, the lights. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't coincidence. Someone had been watching us. Someone had been close enough to touch our property. And we hadn't noticed a single thing. That day, holding the tiny device, I realized a terrifying truth about the world around us: systems respond only to action that crosses a threshold. Police respond to crimes committed. Not crimes anticipated. Not invasions silently unfolding. Only acts with proof, only tangible losses. And in this case, the system failed us entirely. I set the camera down on the kitchen table. My parents hovered over it, worried but trying not to panic. I stared at it a long time, thinking about all the moments over the past decade where maybe something was right there, unseen, and I had never even noticed. The final, chilling thought settled over me slowly. Someone had been close enough to plant it, and we never saw them. And that's when it became impossible to pretend we weren't being watched. After the hidden camera incident, life should have returned to a semblance of normal. The summer stretched on. Birds sang, lawns were mowed, children biked along the street, and the quiet suburban rhythm carried on. But normalcy is a fragile veneer. And the cracks showed soon enough. Our next-door neighbors moved out. Their house was vacant for barely a month before a new couple appeared. Young, quiet. Polite enough. A little too quick for such a large home in a family-focused neighborhood. At first, I didn't think much of it. People move. That's life. But then, I started noticing them. Not casual glimpses. Not passing nods. They were standing. Always standing. At the top floor window, looking down at our yard. Morning. Afternoon. Evening. Their posture wasn't casual. It wasn't a gaze distracted by the phone or the television. They were deliberate. Intentional. Always stationary, always watching. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. I rationalized. Busy work schedules, maybe a home office at odd hours. Maybe they liked sunlight streaming across the yard. Normal explanations. But the pattern persisted. Then one night, while walking my dog, I caught them with someone else. A third man. Distinct. Bald. Broad shoulders. Thick eyebrows. The kind of face that lodges in your memory like a photograph burned into retina. They weren't interacting like friends or family. They weren't talking animatedly. The man just sat, upright, facing the couple. Conversation I couldn't hear. But their collective posture, the way the woman abruptly noticed movement outside and closed the curtains instantly, told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't the curtain itself. It wasn't even that they were observing us. It was the timing. The awareness. The instinctive, immediate reaction the moment I noticed them. I froze for a moment, leash slack in my hands, dog sniffing the sidewalk. Night insects hummed. A distant car passed. The only sound in that still suburban stretch was the faint jingling of the leash in my grip. Then, curtain. Sliding closed. Too fast. Precise. Like the house itself was shielding secrets it had no right to keep. For a while, I walked past, telling myself it was coincidence. The dog needed exercise. They were neighbors. Curiosity is human. But the pattern continued. Observation. Recognition. Awareness. Dismissal when I wasn't looking. And repeat. Every time I glanced at that window, I felt it, a measured attention, an acknowledgement of my presence without acknowledgement of my awareness. A psychological grip, more oppressive than the silent idle hum of a late-night SUV, more unsettling than a hidden camera in the bushes. I realized something crucial. It wasn't about what they did. It wasn't about flashlights, cameras, or idle SUVs. It was about the way they knew I was watching, and cared enough to react. The awareness became a weight in the air around me. A constant tension I couldn't shake. It wasn't what they did. It was how aware they seemed of when I noticed. Life moved forward, or at least it seemed to. I went to college. The distance was a kind of shield. I rarely thought about the house, the street, the quiet scrutiny of my childhood. For years, I had convinced myself the incidents had been isolated, random, or coincidental. The slow-moving SUV. The flashlight cars. The hidden camera in the bushes. Neighbors who watched without interacting. All of it faded into memory, stories I could recount without feeling the chill I once did. They became anecdotes, cautionary tales, almost entertaining in their improbability. I focused on studies, exams, the constant whirl of campus life. Dorm rooms. Cafeteria lines. Group projects. Late nights spent laughing with friends. For a time, I allowed myself to believe, maybe it was over. Maybe it had always been over. The longer I was away, the easier it became to treat those memories as fiction. The kind of thing you tell friends over beers for a laugh, exaggerating the details, or smoothing over the moments that made your stomach turn at night. Distance has a way of making fear feel fictional. Graduation arrived. Caps thrown into the sky, the sun glinting off the stage, diplomas in hand, hugs, photos, and the roar of parents proud of their children. I smiled. I celebrated. I convinced myself that the world was safe again. Boxes were packed. Cars loaded. Friendships hugged tight with promises to stay in touch. I was moving back home. And in my mind, returning felt like reclaiming a place untouched by the past, clean, ordinary, predictable. We were supposed to be on vacation. Celebration. A family trip abroad. Something normal, ordinary, with laughter, food, pictures, and the kind of conversations that float over the table late at night. I tried to leave the past behind, to treat those memories as old stories. But old stories have a way of catching up. It started in a dimly lit bar one evening. Warm wood, soft lights, the low murmur of conversations. My family was gathered at a booth near the back. Everyone was relaxed. Glasses clinking, servers moving past with trays of drinks. I was halfway through a conversation about local architecture when I caught movement across the room. And then I saw him. The bald man. Broad shoulders, thick eyebrows. The same man I had seen in the neighbor's kitchen years ago, the one whose presence had never made sense. I froze. He was sitting alone in a booth, his gaze sweeping the room. And then our eyes met. Not fleeting. Not accidental. I felt it in my chest first, a physical pull, like the world had condensed into that instant. He knew. He recognized me. I tried to rationalize, bar seating is limited. Maybe it was someone who just looked like him. Maybe my brain was connecting dots that didn't exist. But then he got up. No hesitation. No glance aside. He left his drink untouched and disappeared into the crowd as though the room had swallowed him whole. I tried to follow. The bar was too packed, too many people, too dimly lit, and just like that, he was gone. I sat back down, heart racing, telling myself it was coincidence. I forced a laugh. I tried to finish my conversation. Days later, while walking through the city during daylight, I saw him again. This time, he wasn't passive. He held a professional-looking camera. He was photographing near a famous landmark, but something about the way he angled the lens made it clear, he wasn't interested in the monument. He was waiting. Watching. Counting. Calculating. At that moment, all rational explanations collapsed. Coincidence wasn't possible anymore. Patterns, distances, probability, none of it made sense. I couldn't hold it in any longer. Every moment since the bar incident had gnawed at me. My hands shook slightly as I spoke. I told my parents everything. Every sighting. Every subtle pattern I'd noticed over the years. Every skipped heartbeat, every lingering shadow. Every time I had brushed it off as coincidence, now I recounted in detail. For the first time in this story, there was no dismissal. No polite rationalization. My dad's expression changed in a way I hadn't seen before. He stopped mid-chew, mid-thought, mid-motion, as if the air had thickened around him. Then he spoke. He believed me. Not a hint of doubt. Not a shrug of, "It's just paranoia." Just an immediate, unwavering conviction. He suggested we end the trip early. Leave the country, leave the city, leave whatever had attached itself to us. I felt a shift in my stomach, a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that someone else acknowledged it, but terror that recognition made it undeniable. If my father, the man who solves cases, who analyzes evidence, who reasons through impossible odds, believed it, then it must be true. We returned home. Jet-lagged. Exhausted. Ready to settle back into the comfort of familiar streets, familiar walls. At first, nothing happened. No shadows flickering across the yard, no headlights crawling past the curb, no unexpected movements at the edge of the woods. Just silence. Ordinary silence. But it felt different. The silence had weight now. It wasn't empty, it was expectant. The quiet was holding something just beyond perception, like a held breath you can almost feel pressing against your chest. I started noticing things. Small things. A curtain twitching in an upstairs window when no one was there. A shadow slipping between trees just as I thought I'd caught a glimpse. Footsteps behind the screen door that vanished before I opened it. And then it hit me. That's how it always works. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Once you know someone is watching, the world changes. Everything mundane can hide intent. Every normal streetlight can illuminate observation. Every neighbor's glance becomes suspect. It wasn't about evidence anymore. It wasn't about cameras, cars, or strangers. It was the awareness itself that became the threat. That creeping, constant suspicion that whatever you thought was private, whatever you assumed was safe, was already under observation. I catch myself now, sometimes staring at the street for minutes on end, waiting for something that may never come. Waiting, because I know it's possible. Waiting, because now that I've noticed, I see everything differently.